Hi, welcome to Junkwax Junkie, your authority for all things junk wax. I'm Matt. I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about the 1987 Top Set, the Woodies, as they were known. Now, a very typical set of the time. They had the picture with the wooden background that was copied off of some of the old school style of baseball cards from the 50s and 60s, and they were going to kind of replicate that with this set. Now, I've set up a grading scale for this set for all Junk Wax era, and this is kind of the middle of the road set, so we're gonna use this set as kind of a judge of it all. Now, first I want to talk about a few interesting things about how Topps used to do things. If you look at the numbers that are on the cards, how Topps used to decide who got what numbers, because as we all know, baseball cards have little numbers on it, like this Steve Garvey is number 100. What Topps would do is they would group the cards that they had to make, because they couldn't make a card of every single player, that they wanted to make sure that they got certain players in. So if you had a number that was in the hundreds, then that meant that you were a premier player at the time, and that meant that you obviously got a card. So if you had a card, if your number on the back was 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, because the set has 792 in it, then that meant you were one of the league's premier stars and you were somebody who was in demand. So Steve Garvey has the dubious honor of having 100. Not exactly a Hall of Famer. We look at it in retrospect now and we think, why does Steve Garvey warrant so much respect? But then they would number them on the tens. So like 110 is John Tudor. So John Tudor, because then he would be considered 10, he has the number of 110 on his card, he would be considered a little bit more important. So they weren't based upon any other way than their whatever system Topps decided to do it. The quality of the set, I'm going to give the card stock quality. That's one category. And the card stock is pretty typical for the era. The card stock is pretty standard for the Junk Wax era, so I'm giving it a 5. It's the typical kind of cardboard cutout. When it comes to photo quality, well, some of the pictures are pretty good, some aren't. Some look like high school senior pictures, but they do have some kind of cool action photos, like this Gary Reedus. It's got a pretty decent photo quality to it, and it's nice to show a cool action shot. So I gave that a 5. The design, well, it's kind of in that bridge before the insert era started hitting the Junk Wax era. So I'm giving those a 5 too. Key cards, that's the next era that's in. There were some key cards in the set. When the set came out, there was the Jose Canseco and the Wally Joyner that everyone wanted. But there's also a lot of classic cards in there. You'll find some Nolan Ryan, some Tom Seaver. There's some classic guys that were kind of holdovers from the 70s that were still around, plus a lot of young stars that were coming up in the 80s and 90s. It's got some Will Clark. So again, since we're using this as kind of the standard, I gave the key cards a 5. Now there's two other standards I'm going to use to judge Junk Wax sets. Another one is something called the crash effect, which is how did they hold their value after the crash versus before the crash of the Junk Wax cards that occurred in the early 90s. Well, I'm giving that a 5 too, because there were some cards that kind of held their value, but most of them, it's kind of hard to say that with Junk Wax because, well, they all kind of lost it. But I'm still giving them a 5, and here's why. There's still somewhat of a demand for the cards, especially a Bo Jackson or a Will Clark. There's a little bit of some demand for an 87, especially when comparing it to like the 88 or the 89 or the 90. So there's still a little bit of a demand for some of the cards in the set. So the staying power, since there is somewhat of a demand, I also am giving that a 5 too. So that means key card is a 5, design 5, photo quality 5, crash effect 5, staying power 5, and card stock 5. All of them on a scale of 1 to 10. So that means out of a possible 60, they got a middle of the road 30. So we're going to kind of use the 87 top set as kind of our standard bearer because it is a pretty middle of the road set from the Junkwax era. Another cool last thing I'd be remiss to talk about with all top set is the boxes that the cards would come in. And these is the pretty standard card box. Well, these boxes, I don't know if it was just to mess with people or not, the standard size of them would be less than 792. So what you had to do was, to get a whole set to fit in one of these boxes, you had to cut the edges out. Now I'm going to see how much I can get for these on eBay. I think you can probably, it's safe to say you can get a set of 87 tops on eBay that are in good shape, probably a factory set for $5. That's probably a pretty true statement. So again, that kind of holds to its staying power. You can at least get something for an 87 top set. It's not like an 88 score where you can't give them away. They're at least somewhat decent, and it is kind of an underrated set. Okay, join us on our next video where we'll be talking about another set. Please like, please subscribe if you're a Junkwax Junkie fan just like me.